Today in this class, we are going to discuss here various aspects of the skull. Various aspects means we have to watch here first the anterior view of the skull. In the class that will be followed by this, we will be discussing the lateral view of the skull and later on the superior and the posterior view. Now, as far as the skull is concerned, it is made up of generally 20 bones, and all these bones are joined together by means of the joints. You call them the sutures. You know already the sutures are the fibrous joints, and some other examples of the fibrous joints are the gum fosses. This is the tooth and socket joint, or you said syndesmosis, most important syndesmosis being the inferior tibiofibular joint. Here is again the third category of the fibrous joints. Fibrous joints are those joints which do not allow movements between them, and they are bound together by means of the ligaments here, fibrous tissue which will actually glue them together, will not allow any movements in between mostly. This is called here, like the tooth and socket, you see that they are bound together by means of periodontal ligaments, and they will not allow in a healthy tooth, the tooth will not actually move in the socket. And here similarly the two bones which are in fact joined together by means of the sutures, a ligament is required to bind them or glue them together. This is called the sutural ligament. So they are the sutures, you call them, and there are 22 bones, and out of this a lot of bones are paired bones, but some of them can be unpaired also. The frontal bone, you see one good example, unpaired bone. Sphenoid bone, you see a very big bat-like bone inside, you have seen in the cranial cavity also, which will make appearance in various aspects, in the temporal fossa, in infratemporal fossa, in the orbit, in the cranial cavity. Many aspects of this bone are there. You will see that this is a single bone. Occipital bone, it is a single bone. Mandible itself is a single bone. But rest of other bones you see mostly they are paired bones here. But in all you see they are 22 bones joined together by means of sutures. Now, if for example you are looking at this is called a skull, and this is the view of a skull that you are actually watching. And this view of a skull is called the norma frontalis. You call them frontal view, is a anterior view of the skull. Which bones you are seeing in the skull here? You see, in the front view, you have to have, if you are actually discussing or if you are going to do with the skull means here the things which you are actually seeing. When I will remove the mandible from the skull, the rest of the skull now will be called as no longer will be skull, its name will now it will be referred to as the cranium. And in this cranium, if you are actually watching here, this cover which covers the cranial cavity that houses the brain. If you want to study the brain and the meninges, you have to remove this cover, which mostly is formed by the frontal and the two parietals and the occipital, and to some extent by even a little bit of frontal probably. So if this is actually you are removing this now, you say I have removed this vault. This is called the vault of cranium. Vault of cranium has been removed to see the inside of the rest of the cranial cavity. You will see vault of the cranium is forming most of the part of your cranial cavity is being formed by the vault of cranium. But if you remove the vault of cranium, if you remove the cover, you see that if you remove the lid of the cranial cavity, you will see the rest of the cranial cavity in which you will see the brain and the meninges. So it is the cranium obviously, and the cranium is there, and if you will actually look at this, if you remove one bone, that means 22 bones, out of 22 now 21 bones are remaining here. So cranium contains 21 bones. You see the one bone is this, is the mandible here. Make in total 22 bones here. I have told you that most of these bones are joined together by means of the sutures, but the mandible is joined, or mandible is connected to the rest of the skull by means of a synovial joint, and that is called a TMJ, called temporomandibular joint. Now in this also, if you see this, look at this 22 bones, and out of these 22 bones, because we know that it is called the skull, but the skull is actually made up of two parts. One part of the skull is that whose bones are forming the head, and one part of the skull is that which is forming the face. So the part of the skull that forms the head, it is comprised of 8 bones. Out of 22, 8 bones are those bones which are forming the head region, and these are those bones which are in fact joined together to form the cavity that is called the cranial cavity, and these bones are called the calvaria. So this portion of the skull is called the calvaria. Rest of the bones now, how many? 14 bones, and these all 14 bones together is called the facial skeleton. Facial skeleton that encloses, you see, if for example, if I will say, assume that we have 7 big viscera in your head and neck, I say in your head, which contains, you see that contains face and the calvaria, scalp and the face. From outer side you see that from surface you say it is a face and it is scalp. And scalp means those are the 8 bones which constitute the scalp region, and these regions, scalp region means not just scalp, you say that cranial region, calvaria region. In the calvaria, this encloses or this will in fact join together to form here a cavity that is called the cranial cavity, and the biggest viscera of your head region lies inside the calvaria, inside the cranial cavity, that is the brain. But we do not have just one viscera here, we have 6 more. And all these 6 more, they are enclosed within the facial skeleton. And these 6 big viscera, you know, that is called the eyeball in the facial skeleton, that means into the orbit. We have got the nose in the nasal cavity. We have got the tongue and other things here, say in the oral cavity. And at the same time, we have got the pharynx and larynx also. At the same time, you see this ear also. All 6 viscera, and then that's why, because 6 viscera out of 7 are being accommodated by the facial skeleton. That's why this part of the skull is called viscerocranium. And because this upper portion, which is 8 bones, which constitute the calvaria, which constitute or which form the cranial cavity that houses the brain, that's why that part of the skull is called, or that part of the skull will be called as the neurocranium. So neurocranium, cranium, calvaria, all these are the synonyms, you see that. And here you see that is called here viscerocranium, facial skeleton, all these things are the different. And here this facial skeleton constitutes, or this will be comprised of 14 bones, and then neurocranium, I say the calvaria is comprised of 8 bones. But all of them you see that they are joined together by means of sutures, except the mandible, which is connected with the rest of the skull at the synovial joint, that is called the temporomandibular joint. Though it is a typical synovial, but it is very much synovial joint. Now in this also, when you are discussing skull, anterior features, superior, posterior, etc., you do not have to go actually into too much details here, not required at all. And a student who actually has finally to read the X-ray or see the CT scan or MRI, or have to actually deal with the clinical scenario, what he has to do means you have to draw a line that what you want to, or what you are required to do. Required to do, you look at the skull, identify the bone, look at the major landmarks of the bone which are clinically important. Okay, all the landmarks, no problem. See all the landmarks of the bone, identify them only, and look at the landmarks. Is there any foramen, fissure, canal, meatus, or any entrance or exit point there? And if exit point or something is there, we have already told you that ask yourself 4 questions. And ask yourself 4 questions means name the foramen, you have already seen that, that means you are naming it. Localize this foramen, localize means theoretically you should write in one line where this foramen is lying without even skull on the table here. You are actually talking to someone on the phone and you are guiding him that find this foramen at that place. Just one line means it was just a single liner, and you can guide that person with this also. The second thing. Third thing, you see name, location, and at the same time you have to see here this foramen is connecting which 2 regions. Means which 2 regions? If you are looking at this foramen, means in one region you are yourself sitting. This foramen guides you to which region now you have to actually pass the wire through that, and you will watch the other end of the wire where from it comes out. If it comes out, for example, you see if you are passing something through the foramen oval, sitting in infratemporal fossa, you will see that this foramen oval, you pass the wire through that, and you will see that wire from where it comes here. You know that it comes from the middle cranial fossa. So you say foramen oval is lying in the greater wing of sphenoid, and it connects the two regions. Two regions means a middle cranial fossa with infratemporal fossa, that's all. And the fourth question will be, what structure are being transmitted here? Something will be transmitted from infratemporal fossa to the to the middle cranial fossa, or from middle cranial fossa to the infratemporal fossa. It is two-way traffic. Sometimes even just the structures just pass from one region to other, not returning other regions will be there. You see the veins will come, arteries, nerves, etc. These are the things here. This will be the question that you will be dealing with this fourth question in a more appropriate and elaborated way when you are doing the neurovascular bundles. Here 3 questions, they are enough to be answered. This is here, and if you have done this, I think from my side it has been done. You don't have to actually go to the next region, that means the superior view, next to the posterior view. These things you have to actually deal with. At least in the osteology portion, you don't have to go into the whole details about that. You go through this in the first phase, you have to do this. Now watch it. With this now, we are going to see this now. In this various bones you are seeing, first of all you watch this bone. This is the bone which you are actually seeing here. This bone is called the frontal bone. So frontal bone in the skull, most of you see that almost all of your forehead is being formed by the frontal bone. This is a single bone. And this single bone, this frontal bone will go to the superior aspect also, but because we are doing here the anterior aspect, that's why the superior aspect will be done when the superior view we will watch. So here, this will actually come here little to the lateral sides also, and will come here very less here to your anterior side, up to your up to the bridge of the nose here. This bone is giving you various processes. It's not just giving you various processes, it will now stop here and will forming here the borders. These are called the margins of the orbit. Will not just margins of the orbit, this will actually reflect here, or a band here will go here to form the roof of the orbit also. And something which is forming the roof of the orbit will forming the floor of the anterior part of the cranial fossa also. Cranial fossa means anterior part of the anterior cranial fossa. But we are not discussing the anterior cranial fossa, we are not discussing the orbit here, we are discussing just the front here. But you should give some concept to yourself that they are forming various parts here. Watch this. Now if for example watching here this bone, this is called the frontal bone. We have told you that this is the frontal bone. So watch this frontal bone. Number 1, this is the frontal bone. This is frontal bone. Number 1. This is the frontal bone that you are watching, and feel this bone. After this frontal bone, you see various parts of frontal bone. We told you that identify the bone and see the major landmarks. See the landmarks here. If this is a frontal bone, you are watching this area, because this is forming here the orbital margins also. Superior orbital margin, little bit you see, less than 5 to 10% on the lateral orbital margin, and also a little bit of medial orbital margin also. So this you are actually seeing this. So in this also you are watching this orbital margin. So orbital margin has been formed here. And this will not just be forming orbital margin, it will be forming here the roof of the orbit also. This we will discuss in the orbit, bony orbit. And here in the orbital margin, you will see here there is a foramen. Sometimes there is a foramen, or there is a bridge of the bone, little bit bridge of the bone is broken here. This will look like a notch. Okay, you can consider it like a foramen. Foramen. You call them the supraorbital foramen. And this is called the supraorbital foramen. So call this supraorbital foramen. This is supraorbital foramen. So supraorbital foramen, stop, 3 questions. Name, supraorbital foramen. Location, at the middle of superior orbital margin. Joining 2 regions, pass the wire, you see it comes from, you see you have gone from the face or from the forehead, and it has gone into the orbit. Means it communicates the orbit with the forehead. That's all. What comes? It is infra, you say supraorbital foramen, supraorbital artery, vein and nerves comes from this. And they will come and we will see that. And if this is called supraorbital foramen, number 1. Another will be, you see that the frontal bone is coming toward the nasal side also. Toward the nasal side. The single bone, we told you that. It's toward the nasal side, it's coming here. You say this is the process. You call them nasal process of frontal bone. So this is called the nasal process of frontal bone. So nasal process of frontal bone, and it's coming from here. You see, it's a single bone. I told you that it's a single bone, but it's the nasal process of frontal bone. This nasal process of frontal bone you have seen. Now you are actually watching in this also. You see, between the 2 orbital margins, if you look at this now, these are the orbital margins. These orbital margins, if you see orbital margins little above the orbital margin, you see you have the raised surfaces. If the raised surface means you can feel here over the orbital margin there is some prominences, an arch-like prominences, you call them superciliary arch. So here will be the superciliary arch, you can say. A raised margin, yes, means raised bony arch like ridge. You will call this as the superciliary margin. Superciliary, so it will be an arch, this is called superciliary arch. But when the two superciliary arches are there, they do not meet with each other, but in the central portion, the central depressed part will be there. Here, above the supraorbital margin, we have got the superciliary arch, but in the center you see that depressed area. That depressed area is called the glabella. So this area, this depressed area here is called the glabella. This is called the glabella. So glabella you can feel here a depressed area. On two sides you have got the prominent superciliary arches. These are more prominent in male. All the bones here, in case of male, they are more rough and more prominent landmarks in this various spots. You see, this is called the superciliary arch. Out of the superciliary arch, we have told already, superciliary arch is there, and you have seen here the orbital margin and etc. But at the same time, you are seeing this here, but on the sides here, you see on the sides, this same frontal bone is joining and making a suture with this bone. That's called the zygomatic bone. That's why this process is called zygomatic process of the frontal bone. So you call this process as the zygomatic process of frontal bone. Zygomatic process of F is the frontal bone. It is called zygomatic process of the frontal bone. So you are watching various various landmarks here. In these landmarks, you don't have any any areas where you have seen the fissures or the foramina. Just one foramen you have seen, and about this foramina you have given 3 questions and their answers have been discovered. Now after this, if you are coming down here, you see this bone is not just forming the forehead region, or you say when you come to the superior view, but it is forming some parts of your orbit also. The orbit roof is being formed, margin has been formed, but this orbit, this will be done in the separately in the class of bony orbit. But you see this is the frontal bones, various parts you have actually seen here. But when you come down here, you will see this green color. This is a bone which is just forming the upper part of the nasal bridge here. This is again the paired bone, a small bone. Again paired bone, this means 2 bones are there, one come from left and another from right, and forming here a suture. It's called the internasal suture. But these 2 nasal bones, they are actually making a suture with the nasal process frontal bone which is coming from above. I mean this bone which you are actually seeing here is called the nasal bone. You call them this nasal bone. This is nasal bone. And here will be the suture that is called the nasal suture. So you see internasal suture is there. And these 2 nasal bones pair, it is fixing here and making a suture with the frontal bone, frontonasal suture. But you see that the frontal bone, which process? The nasal process of frontal bone. And these 2 nasal bones are again giving here, and we have told you that. Then after this, you are coming to this, see this now red color, this is called the zygomatic bone. Zygo means paired. Means in fact this is coming here like a yolk. This bone is called the cheekbone also. You see most prominent bone, a very thick bone. And if you see you are punching your face here, the bone that will be encountered first will be this tough bone that is called the zygomatic bone. Zygomatic bone is called the cheekbone also, or you call it malar bone also, M-A-L-A-R. It's called the malar bone. And when there is a hair fleshing or there is a red pinkish appearance here, it's a malar flesh. This is a malar. Malar means zygomatic bone. Malar bone, zygomatic bone, cheekbone. It's a facial yolk. There is something is related to the zygomatic bone. If you are looking at zygomatic bone has got its body. Means it has its body, you can say body of zygomatic bone. I am marking it Z. Body of zygomatic bone. But you see on the body of zygomatic bone we have got 2 foramina. And these 2 foramina are the exit points of those canals which in fact will start from the lateral wall of the orbit. One foramen because it is very close to the temple, very close to the temporal zone, That's why we call them foramen in the zygoma. I say foramen in the zygomatic bone, but it's facing towards and closer to the temporal. That's why its name is the zygomatico-temporal foramen. Very important foramen. It's called the zygomatico-temporal foramen. And then another foramen which is in the body, very close to the body, because it's more facing towards the face now, more closer to the face. That's why that is called the zygomatico-facial foramen. Zygomatico-facial foramen. And if you are passing, so zygomatico-temporal or facial foramina, stop, 3 questions. Name you have seen. Location, already you know that in the body of the sphenoid, I say body of the zygomatic bone. Joining them together, joining the 2 regions together, which 2 regions? Pass the needle through that. Usually these are closed and you cannot actually pass the needles even in the fresh skulls, but you can pass and you will actually see it will go into the canal, will come out here. So the other end of your wire will come from the lateral wall of the orbit, because this zygomatic bone is not forming just the malar or the front of the face here, prominent part of the face, but is forming the lateral margin and a little bit of the inferior margin of orbit, and goes inside to form here little bit of the floor as well as of the lateral wall. And in the lateral wall 2 foramina are also there and forming the canal, and this canal will appear here. And in this canal, the name of the arteries are the veins, and the the nerves passing through these foramina are behind the name of these foramina, you see there. Zygomatico-facial artery, zygomatico-facial vein, zygomatico-facial nerve. Zygomatico-facial, zygomatico-temporal artery, vein and nerve. Zygomatico-temporal nerve is very important because it contains postganglionic parasympathetic fibers for supplying the lacrimal glands. So tears in fact will come by virtue of this nerve. The final order, I don't say it's final, the second last nerve which reaches there is there, because still one more nerve will, because this nerve will hand over the postganglionic fibers to the last nerve, that will be the lacrimal nerve. This lacrimal will be the branch of the trigeminal nerve, this ophthalmic nerve. So this is what we call here the zygomatico-facial and zygomatico. But we have told you that this is the body of zygomatic bone, and zygomatic bone's body is coming here. You said it is making 2 processes. One process will go to the frontal to make here a suture. This is called the frontozygomatic suture. So here is, this is called now, so this will be called as the frontal process of zygomatic bone. It will be simple, frontal, because it is going to the frontal side. Frontal process of zygomatic bone, and another process is coming to join here with this bone, that is called the maxilla. That's why this is called the maxillary process of zygomatic bone. Very simple it is. Maxillary process of zygomatic bone. These are the few landmarks which you have seen here on the face after frontal and the nasal. These processes are there. And in this also you see 2 foramina you have already watched here. So 1 foramen you have seen and 2 more you have watched. Now watch here another bone very large, whose other aspects you will visualize or you will actually come across when you will come into the nasal cavity. When you will see the oral cavity, I say floor, roof of the oral cavity, that is called the palate, you will see these all things here. You will come and you will see this bone at multiple places here. We will see this bone when you are going into the orbit, but we will see this bone when you are seeing the front here. When you are seeing the front here, in this front you are watching this bone is called the maxilla. You see this is a big bone, we call it the maxilla. This maxilla is having a very big air sinus inside it. So if you look at the maxilla, and maxilla looks like a big bone here, it is not a very solid bone you see, it is a hollow bone inside. It is a hollow cavity you see that inside the hollow cavity its walls being formed by the maxilla. So maxilla forms basically the plates, small plates. That's why when the punch, nature has given here prominence here for the protection of maxilla. Maxilla is very, I say it is the delicate bone, it is not very thick bone because inside it is a hollow. But this is not having a hollow. Zygomatic bone doesn't have any air sinus inside it. Maxilla has the air sinus, and sinus is very big. Actually, most of the almost 90% of the total volume of the maxilla itself should be occupied by the air sinus. As you can imagine that hardly less than 10% of the area is the bone. So it will be very, very light. And here this bone, for example, if there is a trauma from outside here, this is a trauma, you will see that this bone will undergo multiple fractures. That's why nature has given this prominence out, so that when the punch will be over the face, this will bear the punch first. And if this is the bone which I'm telling you, is again very important. The reason is there because it is lying at the center of the three major cavities. Medially it has a nasal cavity, inferiorly it has oral cavity, superiorly it has got the orbital socket, the bony orbit. Means it is forming the walls everywhere. When this maxilla is there, it is forming here say floor of your orbit, it is forming the lateral wall of your nasal cavity, and it is forming the roof of the oral cavity also. And here this is now a centrally positioned maxilla. You can call it the body of maxilla. So it is called the body, central portion, body of maxilla. Maximum bone, the large bone you see, that is a very big bone here, that's why I call it maxilla, it is maximum bone. So it is called the maxilla. And if you look at this maxilla now, you will see maxilla laterally make a suture with the zygomatic bone. That's what I call it the zygomatic process of the maxilla. This is zygomatic process of maxilla, which is actually going here laterally to join with the maxillary process of the zygomatic bone. If this is here, then you are actually watching that one process is going in such a way upward here toward the frontal bone. That is called the frontal process of, or you say it is going to the nasal side, you say nasal process of the maxilla. So this would be called as nasal process of maxilla, or you can call it frontal process also. Nasal process of maxilla. Now, if the nasal process of maxilla, you see, if the nasal process of maxilla is going from left, so it is going from right also. And it is going from right because they will not meet with each other, you see, in the center. Why? Because in the center already the paired nasal bones. Means paired nasal bones are going from the center, and from sides there is a pair of maxillary processes. We call them nasal process of maxilla, they are coming. So that means from below 4 bones are going. Laterally flanked by, you see, a paired nasal bones in the center, and 2 bones you see flanked left and right by the nasal processes of the maxilla. So 4 bones are joining, and from above is coming just a single frontal bone. This is called the nasal process of frontal bone. They will join together. Means 5 bones will actually join in this depressed area. You see, it's in the bridge of the nose here in this area. That area is called the nasion. This area. Understand? This is called the nasion. So we call this area as the nasion. This nasion, your depressed area where 5 bones they meet. This is called the nasion. Like when they say, like terion, nasion, inion, these are the various names of the spots here. This is 5 bones actually meet. A pair of nasal, a pair of maxillary frontal process or nasal processes, and from above the single frontal bone, nasal process of frontal bone fused together to form a suture. This is what we call here the nasion. You can feel the nasion. Above the nasion here the glabella. On the sides we have got the superciliary arches. We have supraorbital margins also. So you are watching in this whole area is the maxilla. When you are actually looking at the maxilla, so that means maxilla, if it will actually be forming here, the margins of this bony marking, you see, this is the aperture. The aperture, or you say apertures, upper margins are formed here by the nasal bones, a pair of nasal bones, and the rest of it is being formed here by the maxilla. This is the maxilla. So this whole aperture has been formed. This aperture is called the pyriform aperture. That will guide you into the nasal cavity, and from this aperture will be raised the external nose here. External nose, you see external nose made up of the cartilages, alar, lateral. They are forming the nasal bridge. So in this also, so you are watching here, this is called the nasion. So nasion is this depressed area in which we have seen the 5 bones joining together. A pair of nasal, pair of nasal process of the maxillary, and then the frontal bones comes from above to join with these 4 bones coming from below. This is what we call here the nasion. And then we told you that here another thing, this is actually, see here, from above hardly say 10% is being formed here by the margins of this hole, this aperture, which is being actually bounded here by hardly upper here 10% portion from both sides formed by the margins of nasal bone, but the rest of its below, you know that it is formed here by the maxilla. So big aperture has been created here that will guide you into the nasal cavity. This aperture is called the pyriform aperture. It's not just the pyriform aperture. When you are actually looking at this, where the two maxillary bones will join together here, you see maxilla, it is a pair bone. So we have the suture here. This is called the intermaxillary suture. When anteriorly the intermaxillary suture starts, right here under this septum of your nose, you will feel here a spine. That spine is called the anterior nasal spine. This anterior nasal spine here means your roof, I say floor of your nasal cavity starts from the anterior nasal spine. When you are actually going here until the posterior nasal spine comes, this all will be the floor of the nasal cavity, and that is being formed here mostly by this maxilla. Not only this, if the floor of your nasal cavity has been formed by the maxilla, the lateral process of maxilla, so that will be actually say it is not just the floor of the nasal cavity, roof of the oral cavity will be simultaneously formed with the same plate. That means the oral cavity and nasal cavity has been separated by the palate. This palate is very much part of the maxilla. Almost 90% of your palate is being formed by maxilla, the hard palate. And that is the intermediate, you say intervening plate between the nasal cavity and the oral cavity. If you pass something through the floor of the nasal cavity, it will come from the roof of the oral cavity. But here we are watching the front. That's why we will not go into the detail of your nasal cavity, but we watch here this here maxilla, everything, and now we have various processes of maxilla you have seen. But at the same time in the maxilla you will find here a foramen, a very important foramen that is called here the infraorbital foramen. Just like your supraorbital foramen, this is another foramen that is called infraorbital foramen. Watch this. This is infraorbital foramen. Name infraorbital foramen. Location body of this of the maxilla just closer to the inferior orbital margin. Communication between two chambers. You see two compartments. One is the face, and if you are passing the wire through that, it will go into the orbit. We will discuss that in the orbit more, but it will go into the orbit, in the bony orbit. So that means it will actually transmit the structure from orbit to the face, or from face back into the orbit, and from orbit onward here to the many other communications. So see, this is what we call here the maxilla, but at the same time, so the maxilla has got a very important relation with your orbit, with your nasal cavity and with the oral cavity, in such a way that these longitudinal ridges here of the bones which you see here, which have the sockets inside them, these longitudinal ridges of the bones that you even sometimes prominent ridges you feel here also, these are called alveolar processes. Alveolar processes are the longitudinal ridges, see, which are containing the sockets inside, and these sockets are housing the roots of the teeth to form here, and they are bound together by means of the periodontal ligament. A joint has been created. You call such joint as the fibrous joint, specifically named as gomphosis, tooth thin socket joint. A periodontal ligament, healthy periodontal ligament will not allow the tooth to move here in the socket. And once the tooth start moving in the socket, means the periodontal ligament has been weakened. And one day you see that it will fall. And if, for example, this is what we say here, this is called the alveolar processes, and now you have got the alveolar processes, we have got the alveolar processes, they will house the teeth. You say maxillary teeth. 8 from one side, 8 from other side, jaw has been completed here. So jaw, upper jaw is being formed here by the paired maxillary bones. And in the center we have got the suture also, this intermaxillary suture, and this will stop here and will go, it is not stop, it will go inside also, forming the roof of the oral cavity, you call it palate. After the roof of oral cavity, automatically floor of your nasal cavity has been formed. Means nasal cavity and oral cavity are separate by virtue of the hard palate. And once the hard palate from one side up and in the other side, if they fail to fuse here, you say it is cleft palate. Because the palate is also forming the lips, so sometimes a cleft lip is also there. Sometimes the cleft lip and palate both are there also. This is because of the non-fusion of the two parts of maxilla from two sides. So if you see here, this is something you are watching in the maxilla region. So you have seen the maxilla, you have seen the zygomatic bone, you see the frontal bone, you see the nasal bone, and next the part of the skull which you see from the front is the mandible. Mandible we will discuss in detail, but you see in the mandible various parts here, again alveolar processes, mandibular teeth. You have got two big parts of the mandible you will see here. This portion, this is called the body, you can feel. And immediately you see here the angle, there will be vertically rising from here will be the ramus. This is the ramus. We will see that also, but you see that is called the ramus, and this also alveolar processes, mandibular teeth, lower jaw has been formed, that will move and will strike the upper jaw. Upper jaw does not move, the lower jaw moves here, and this will cut the food into pieces here. It was not just cut the things into pieces, but it will crush them also, grind them as well, and more saliva will be added and bolus will be created. And if this is here, you see that in this also you see many things, but here one thing that you are actually watching, this is called the mental foramen. You are watching here the mental. So this is now we say it is the ramus of mandible. You are watching here the body of mandible. We will discuss the mandible separately, separate class, but here you watch here, this is called the mental foramen. Mental foramen. Foramen, 3 questions. This is mental foramen. You will see this mental foramen name, location in the body of the mandible. Almost at the middle of the alveolar processes in the inferior border of the body of mandible in young skull. If the alveolar processes are in fact has been eroded here, this foramen will become more closer to the alveolar processes in old skull. In child, you see that it is more closer to the inferior border of the body of mandible. So almost at the middle in the young adults. So if this is here, this is called the mental foramen, and we have seen some other also. You see, these are called the alveolar processes. Of mandible, and you have seen these alveolar process of maxilla. Understand? So this is something that you are watching, the anterior view of the skull here. Now in the next class we will be discussing here the superior and the posterior view of the skull, as well as the lateral side also, the lateral view of the skull. This will actually make you the entire circumference of the skull except the inferior border, I say inferior surface of the base of the skull, where you will see infratemporal and pterygopalatine fossa, and in anterior side you will see the palate. Palate we will discuss in the oral cavity, infratemporal and pterygopalatine fossa we will discuss in separate classes also. This was your class on the anterior view of the skull here. Now we will discuss after the anterior view of the skull, we are discussing here more simpler, the superior and the posterior view of the skull. Now, as far the superior view of the skull is concerned, you are actually looking at the skull from superior side. Superiorly means if you are looking at this now, you see here is the frontal bone. This is the frontal we have done here, and the anterior side, yes, you have done the frontal bone here in the anterior side. In the anterior view, its forehead totally is formed by the frontal bone, but this frontal bone will not stay here, it will now go superiorly also. In the superior view, almost you see more than 30 to 40% of your superior view is being here accommodated by the frontal bone, until there will be a suture appearing here that will tell you that another bone is coming, and this time it is a paired bone, because frontal is a single bone. And if you are looking at the single bone, this frontal bone, so you will see that frontal bone is present there. Now in this frontal bone, the suture now comes, and the suture will actually joining this single frontal bone with a pair of parietal bones. So this will be called the parietal bones. So here is the parietal from this side and parietal from other side. So here, so there is a suture between the single frontal with the paired parietal, and that suture, because it is lying in the sagittal plane, that is why the suture is called a sagittal suture. So this is called sagittal suture. So here is the frontal bone. In this frontal bone, this is a single frontal bone is joining posteriorly with the paired parietal bone by means of a suture, because this suture is lying in a coronal plane, that is why this suture is called the coronal suture. And on the back side, you are watching the two parietal bones joining with each other by means of this interparietal suture, because this interparietal suture is lying in a sagittal plane That is why the suture is called the sagittal suture. Now you see that this sagittal suture, it joins at this middle point of the coronal suture. That single middle point where there is sutures, anterior end of the sagittal suture joining with the midpoint of the coronal suture, this midpoint is called bregma. So you call it bregma. So this is called a bregma. And at the same time, if you are actually going behind here, you will see some part of this bone you are watching, this green color. This is the occipital bone. On the back side, the occipital, some part of the occipital you will see here on the superior view also. And this is the bone. So that means from here, we say, sir, how we will come to know that another bone starts? You see, suture is visible now. Suture is visible. And that suture is more or less V-shaped, lambda-like. That's why I call it lambdoid suture. So this is actually, you see here black color, this is black color, last portion. Means this last portion in this view actually is this, on the back view, in the posterior view. And this green which you are actually watching, this, it is the beginning of that V. So this is the beginning of here. So this area which is more visible on the posterior side can be visible here on the superior side also, and this is here. So you say that lambdoid suture is started, means the posterior end of your sagittal suture touches the midpoint of the lambdoid suture, and that point is called the lambda. Understand, this is called the lambda. This is called bregma, this is called the lambda. Means the anterior end of your sagittal suture and posterior end of the sagittal suture joining at a point anteriorly with the midpoint of the coronal and posterior with the midpoint of the lambdoid suture. And this area which you are actually watching in this is a superior view you are seeing. You see, at the time of development, because these are the bones which develop from membrane, these are intramembranous ossification, not from cartilage. There is no intervening from mesenchyme to bone formation, there is no intervening hyaline cartilage here. So here they are actually developing from mesenchyme directly into the bone. So they will develop in membrane. But at the time when the baby is born, some part of the skull bones still are not converted into bone. They have not yet ossified. So this part you see, this portion of parietal, and similarly obviously this portion of the parietal, as well as the adjacent part of the frontal, they are not yet ossified. When the baby is born, you will feel here around the bregma zone, around the bregma point, there are certain bones. You see two parietal sideways and anteriorly frontal bone. Here there is a softness because it is still a membrane. Such membranes are called fontanelles. So this is called anterior fontanelle. And similarly on the back side also we have got this is posterior fontanelle. Means two parietals and adjacent part of the occipital. This is posterior fontanelle. And in pelvis you have already seen that at the time of the parturition, as a result of the secretion of the relaxin hormone, the ligaments of the pubic symphysis and sacroiliac joint and sacrococcygeal joints, they get relaxed here, and when the baby's head is being passed through the birth canal, you see these relaxed ligaments in fact will allow some extra diameter, some extra space for the passage. It's not just the bones are in fact giving you the cavity here, expanding the cavity. Similarly, the skull is also a little bit compressed. Compression of the skull and expansion of the pelvis, it will offer temporarily more than 20% of your extra diameter you will actually, extra space you will acquire because of this natural process. This is here because of the fontanelle. See, you have the membrane here, compression is easy. And it's not just anterior posterior fontanelle. We have got mastoid, we have got other fontanelles. In the pterion area, we have 4 bones, there is a fontanelle also. In the zygomatic, in your mastoid area, there is a fontanelles also. So that means when the skull is there, so if these membranes are there, so just like say because these membranes are softer, so then pressure is there, pressure here, so your skull diameter will decrease at the time of parturition and easily the head will come out. This is something that you are actually watching, and we have got a lot of other clinical implications or clinical significance of the anterior fontanelles also, because if there is a raised intracranial pressure, they will be raised. and if the child is actually having a dehydration, this will be depressed. Means if the status of hydration is assessed by the status of the anterior fontanelles. And through the anterior fontanelles, sometimes even the cannula can be passed to reach the internal cranial sinuses to put even the extra fluid into this. Means even sometimes these cannula are used here. If this is something you are watching here, and these fontanelles will not remain for a long period, this anterior fontanelle usually fuses within 1 year. 1 year, maximum 1.5. At the posterior fontanelle, even earlier. And if this is here, this is called a superior view of the skull which you are seeing and some important landmarks. But if you look at this posterior view, similar thing, we see posterior view, again same, posterior fontanelle, parietal bone is reaching here, lambdoid is here, sagittal suture is here, lambdoid suture is here. And here in the occipital bone you are watching, and if you are looking at the occipital bone, you see at the center you have a prominence. You call it protuberance because it is from outside here, and similarly you will see this inside in the cranial cavity also. And here you say outside, that is why you call them external occipital protuberance. External occipital protuberance. And from external occipital protuberance, two transverse ridges in fact they spread here, and they will come here to the, I say, to the zygomatic, I say to the mastoid process. These are called superior knuckle lines. Superior knuckle lines means if you will actually touch your external occipital protuberance and you see two superior knuckle lines are spreading here, going here to the posterior border of the mastoid process, I tell you this is the end of your neck and beginning of your head. And from back it is the head obviously, from back it is not the face, so it will be the scalp. Means the scalp starts here from the posterior occipital protuberance, I say external occipital protuberance and the superior knuckle lines. But if you see from superior knuckle lines you will go and the base of the skull will come, and you see almost parallel to more faint ridges will now come here. These are called inferior knuckle lines. These are called the inferior knuckle lines. But from superior knuckle line, inferior knuckle line, there is a crest also. This is called the occipital crest. If you see in the skull, you will have an external occipital protuberance more prominent. But if you want to touch it, the point that touches you first, that is called inion. Means it is the most prominent point, is called the inion. So if you will touch inion, and now you are actually traveling anteriorly in the midline, and you will stop at a nasion, this most probably this is the part which in fact is called the scalp. Rest of it is called the face. So this will be something you are seeing here. So we have got the inion, as a nasion, we have the inion. Inion, the most prominent part, I say most prominent point of the external occipital protuberance. So this is here, this is called the say external occipital protuberance. We have got these superior and inferior knuckle lines. This is something which you are actually seeing on the occipital region, on the region which is in fact is present on the posterior. So this is a posterior view of the skull, superior view of the skull, front view or say anterior view of the skull. These things you have seen by now. After some time we are actually discussing the lateral view of the skull. We have still important landmarks on the lateral side also. And on the lateral side you will see here some important introduction to your temporal fossa will be done here in the lateral side of the skull also. Okay, now in this class we are discussing the last segment of the outer features you say of the skull. This is the last segment. In the previous segments we have discussed the anterior view, the superior view and the posterior view. This time we are discussing here the second largest portion where the most landmarks you are going to visualize. This is called the lateral view, norma lateralis. If you are looking at this, you see the dominant bone on this side, though it is a larger part here being you can say the larger part being here the parietal bone also. Frontal bone is also coming, but the most landmarks which you see here, it is the temporal bone. You see it is the lateral side, temporal side. You see this is called temporal, means this is the temporal area temporal area, and here is the fossa, that is called the temporal fossa, which you will actually watch here. Now in this especially you see some landmarks. I have told you that identify the bones, go to the bone and watch the most important landmarks there. In the landmarks, if you are watching or if you are looking at some fissure, foramen or canal or meatus or anything, you stop there and ask yourself 4 questions, at least 3 of them. So you will see this here. In the frontal bone, we have already told you here, frontal bone on the superior side, here all these things. On the lateral side, you have seen this also. Laterally, even from the lateral view also, you can see this in the frontal bone, you can see this also. This is called the superior orbital fissure. I say superior supraorbital foramen. This is present also. It will be visible here. So from lateral side you can see, otherwise it is more visible from the front. This is called the supraorbital foramen that you have already seen in the anterior view. But you see other things are here, and posteriorly you see, posteriorly it making here a suture, or it makes here a joint with the parietal bone. So it is making joint with the parietal bone here, and here it is not making joint with the parietal bone. When the parietal bone finishes here, you see, when the parietal bone finishes, another bone starts, and this bone is called greater wing of the sphenoid. So you see here it is called the greater wing of the sphenoid. This is a greater wing of sphenoid bone. This greater wing of sphenoid bone means in the temple also there is greater wing of sphenoid. This greater wing of sphenoid is not just forming here the temple, I say temporal area, but this one aspect of this greater wing of sphenoid will be here towards the orbit also. This is forming. The most posterior half of the lateral wall of the orbit is being formed here, because the anterior half is being formed by the zygomatic bone, but the most posterior part of your lateral wall of the zygomatic lateral wall of the orbit is being formed here by the greater wing of sphenoid. And this greater wing of sphenoid is not just present in these 2 aspects, but it is present in its inner aspect is forming the floor of middle cranial fossa, where the 2 foramina you have already seen here, the foramen ovale and foramen spinosum. So this aspect means this greater wing of sphenoid is not visible here. You can see this in the orbit, and you can see in the from middle cranial fossa also. But if you see this greater wing of sphenoid, so that means if it is greater wing of sphenoid is there, this greater wing of sphenoid, above it is making here a suture with this bone. This is called the parietal bone, and I told you this is the frontal, this is the temporal, and here this is sphenoid bone, and this sphenoid bone is making here a horizontal suture. You see that is small suture, horizontal suture with the parietal bone, and this suture is called this horizontal suture, that is called the sphenoparietal suture. Very important here. This is sphenoparietal suture means, and when this sphenoparietal suture finishes here, another bone comes, and this is another bone comes here. This bone is the temporal bone. This is the temporal bone, and this part of the temporal bone which I am actually showing you here, this part which is actually just like a fish scale, you call it the squamous, you call it squamous temporal bone. We say this one is called the squamous part of temporal bone. Squamous part of T. Say squamous part of T. We have a lot of different parts of temporal bone. They are visible here from this side. You see, this is not a squamous part of temporal bone. If you are coming here, you can feel even behind your auricle. You see here this process whose name is a mastoid process. You see this one is called the mastoid process of again temporal bone. Not only the mastoid process, you will see auricle is here, just under that you can't feel it, but this is another process this time, spine, big spine, you can say styloid process. We call it styloid process again of the temporal bone, styloid process. Very important landmark. Again the temporal bone. It's not just a squamous part of the temporal bone. You will see here again, here this is an arch, which is having almost half contributed by temporal bone, and the remaining half is contributed here by the zygomatic bone. and this process with red color which has been shown here, that will join with the green color process. Green color process is called part of zygomatic bone going towards the temporal bone. That's why that is called temporal process of zygomatic bone. So this will be called as the temporal process of zygomatic, this one. The temporal process of Z is called zygomatic bone. This is zygomatic bone. And at the same time, I told you that when the zygomatic bone's temporal process is proceeding towards the temporal bone, similarly the temporal bone is offering here, it will reciprocate. Now you see that it will give you here a process that will come forward here and will join and make here a suture with the zygomatic bone, that means the temporal process of zygomatic bone. So this red color process which will join with this green color process, this red color process which is a part of the temporal bone, because it is proceeding towards the zygomatic bone, that's why this is called a zygomatic process of temporal bone. This is called temporal process of zygomatic, this is called zygomatic process of temporal bone. So you see this fourth part of your temporal bone is this, say zygomatic process of temporal bone. Not only this, but on this side, on the lateral side, you are seeing this hole. This is the meatus this time. This is the meatus through which the sound waves are in fact entering here into the ear. The function is hearing, that's why I call them acoustic. And this time it's not called a canal or a fissure or a foramen or anything. You call it now meatus. And this meatus, because it is outside here, and similar meatus is present inside also in the pittus part of temporal bone. This meatus is called the external acoustic meatus. Again, a part of temporal bone. So this will also be called the external acoustic meatus. Acoustic, related to hearing, but this time you call it meatus. External acoustic meatus is there. But this external acoustic meatus will have actually here a plate which is actually binding it from inferior side here. This is called tympanic plate, again of temporal bone. So here will be the tympanic plate of the temporal bone. So you see this is again this one. Tympanic plate of the temporal bone. So you can see here temporal bone has a lot of processes and ramifications here. See, this is the mastoid process, styloid process, tympanic plate, external acoustic meatus is common part of temporal bone. And at the same time you will see that where your head of the mandible now articulates with the temporal bone from below, you call it the temporomandibular joint, means the temporal bone articulates with the mandible, and mandible is offering here the head, that is called the condyloid process, with the mandibular fossa of the temporal bone to form here a joint that is called the TMJ, or the temporomandibular joint. So here that will be more visible here on the inferior surface, but here also it is visible. But you see lateral side, this is called the squamous portion, and this squamous portion above it is having a suture with parietal, and this in the front it is having a suture with the greater wing of the sphenoid. So you can see here a kind of a curved, or you can say vertical suture has been created here. This suture is called the squamous suture. Here this is called the squamous suture. And this squamous suture is making here a suture in front with what? In front with greater wing of the sphenoid below and parietal above. And parietal and greater wing of the sphenoid themselves, they are making here a suture. This is called the sphenoparietal suture. And this parietal and greater wing of the sphenoid in front is making a suture with the frontal bone. So this bone which I am actually say, it is sphenoid, I say SP is sphenoid. So this is greater wing of the sphenoid and parietal, their pair, which is already making here a suture, is called the sphenoparietal suture. They are in front having here a suture also with the frontal this time. Just like their pair was making a suture behind with the squamous temporal bone, in front they are making a suture with the frontal bone. You can say it is the frontal suture. So H-shaped suture has been created here in this temporal zone here. And when you are actually discussing this H-shaped suture here, you can say above is the parietal, below is greater wing of the sphenoid. This pair is having behind the temporal, in front is the frontal, and where they are actually having, so H-shaped suture has been actually formed here, like here, two curved sutures, and in between we have this sphenoparietal suture. So this H-shaped suture is being created here, and that is spot where this H-shaped suture is present. Above we have got separate bone, and below separate, behind separate, and in front separate. And when these bones are joining together here, especially you see that when they are coming closer here to this H-shaped suture in the central zone here, you will see these bones will get thinner and thinner and thinner. You see that at that spot all the four bones are thinner. And if you will actually see this skull here against the light, you will see it will look translucent even. And that area where all these four bones join together, this H-shaped suture is being formed here in the temporal zone. You call that area as pterion. Very important area. So this will be actually called as the pterion. This is called pterion. So you say it is pterion. When the P is there, no vowel is following, so the P will be silent. So it is starting with the T, it's called the pterion. Pterion is that area, that weaker area on the lateral side of your temple, where all these four bones join together in form of H-shaped suture here. It is called the pterion. Under the pterion, you see deeper to the pterion, in the cranial cavity, there is a very important artery which is actually passing, that is called the anterior division of middle meningeal artery. And when there is a trauma here on this lateral side, due to the impact injury, you see that due to the impact inside, this artery might rupture, and because it is a injury to that artery, so there will be bleeding here, because it is just under the bone now, artery is there, so under that artery will be the dura mater. So this bleeding will be outside the dura, that is called extradural bleeding, and extradural bleeding is very because the potential space is there, so this bleeding is very slow. We will tell you this in the clinicals. This is called the pterion. So pterion injuries are very common in relation to rupture of middle meningeal arteries anterior division, not the posterior, anterior division. This is now what we call here the lateral side you have seen, and here this arch which I am actually showing you here, this is called the zygomatic arch. It has been formed by the two processes, one coming from temporal side, one coming from the zygomatic side. So this area, this zygomatic arch which you can feel here, in front of your auricle, you can feel the zygomatic arch up to the zygoma, up to the malar bone, that is called zygomatic bone. You feel this also. So here, now this zygomatic arch which we are showing you here on this side, this zygomatic arch is not touching the pterion, the bones of the pterion. It is not touching the bones of the pterion. So if for example you are watching in this, so it is not touching the bones of pterion, you can there will be two away from it, like here. So this is like here, you can say it is, the gap is there, means from below you can put your four fingers deep to the zygomatic arch, and your four fingers will now be touching the pterion area. Under zygomatic arch you can put. So that means if you can put your four fingers under the zygomatic arch to reach the four bones of here, so that means you can put your fingers here to the pterion side. So that means if you can put the fingers, so somebody can come also through that area. And who is coming? From here lateral side, there is a muscle that is called the temporalis muscle. If the temporalis muscle takes origin from the temporal area, so all these muscle fibers will join together to form here a tendon, and the tendon will pass under the deeper to the zygomatic arch, just like you are putting your four fingers. And it is passing through the, or say under the zygomatic arch, and it will catch hold of the mandible. And mandible, which one? This spiny part you see, that is called the coronoid process of the mandible. So it will catch hold of the mandible. It is inserted into the the coronoid process of the mandible. And when it will contract, you can say it will contract, it will elevate the mandible. It will elevate the mandible, you can say it will cause shutting of your mouth, you can say. That means it will actually bring the two jaws closer, means it is useful for the biting, is useful for chewing, is called one of the muscles of mastication. And when these muscles of mastication, always you think that it will be supplied here by the mandibular division or trigeminal nerve. All the muscles of mastication, they are supplied by the mandibular division or trigeminal nerve. Though the mandibular division of trigeminal nerve, in addition to supplying four muscles of mastication, it is supplying four other muscles also. So here this is what we call here the pterion. So this is the lateral view you are actually seeing, zygomatic arch and other things you are actually watching here. Now in this area, if you are actually seeing here, you have seen the zygomatic bone, and zygomatic you have seen in the front also. This process which is going to the frontal side, that is called the frontal process of zygomatic bone. This was available, you see, from front also. This is the frontal process of zygomatic. This process was the temporal process zygomatic, and this is the body of zygomatic. And you have seen in this body of zygomatic two foramina also. One is called the zygomaticofacial, another is called zygomaticotemporal foramina. This you have seen in the front also. But the lateral side is also available. At the same time, on the lateral side, you can see this one. This is called the ramus of mandible. Mandible you will do separately. This is called the body of mandible. This is called the angle of mandible. This is mandible bone. This is body of mandible. This is angle of mandible. All you can feel. You see the body of mandible. Here you can see this angle also, and here you see a quadrangular ramus of mandible. As the ramus of mandible is going up here and forming and splitting and forming here two processes. Anteriorly, this is spine-like. You see it is the coronal process, which gave attachment to the temporalis muscle, and behind you see it is having a head that is called the condyloid process, which forms a temporomandibular joint. And here below the mandible, I say below the temporomandibular head, condyloid process, there is a narrow neck also. This will be called the neck. And in between there is a curve, there is a gap. You can put your finger through the gap, that is called the mandibular notch. And all these things, if you are going here and putting your finger through that notch, your finger will be under the base of the skull. And here you are actually watching from lateral side all these, and here at the same time you see the alveolar processes. These are the bony ridges. These bony ridges, they are housing or they are having the sockets, and these sockets are holding the roots of the teeth. By virtue of, you see that the joint has been created here, a fibrous joint that has been made stable here by means of a ligament that is called the periodontal ligament. It's a kind of a fibrous joint. After suture, another example is this, gum fossils you call it. And here this view you are actually seeing here. If for example, if you are looking in this area, if you are putting for example fascia covering your neck, when you are see fascia covering your neck, that's called deep cervical fascia, after skin superficial fascia. This fascia tries to come here over and will try to enclose or ensheath the entire head. Head means scalp as well as face. But you see that the face is devoid of the deep fascia, means from the hairline up to the base of your mandible, say up to the inferior border of the body of mandible up to the angle, all this area where this eyes, nostrils, lips and these things are there, here this whole area is without deep fascia. Remaining every area of the head is having the deep fascia, the same deep fascia which you see that is coming above. When it is coming above from lateral side, though the lateral side is a part of face, but this face is also having a deep fascia. When the deep fascia means the deep fascia which was coming from the neck will stop here over the chin, or the lower part of the body of mandible, over the say at the angles of mandible, then to the mastoid process, then the superior knuckle line, and then the external occipital protuberance. When you are drawing here a circle here, you see that this circle will tell you that the neck has finished and the head has started. This is the boundary between head and the neck. And your envelope, the deep cervical fascia stops here, and now it wants to cover the entire head, but on the face, on the front of the head, you can say it's not allowed to come. Or for example, it was there, but it is now melted here within the superficial fascia, so that the muscles which we are supposed that they should have been deep to the deep fascia, now they are embedded within the superficial fascia, because superficial fascia has also melted and mixed with the superficial fascia. Means deep fascia of the face, if presumably it was there, it is no longer present now, because it has melted, it is mixed with the superficial fascia. Means when you cut the skin, immediately you see superficial fascia, and embedded within the superficial fascia you see the facial expression muscles. Why? Why not deep to the deep? They are skeletal muscles, they are also, you see that they are always deep to the deep fascia. No, because in the face we don't have deep fascia, but on the side we have deep fascia. Which deep fascia? The same deep cervical fascia, but when it comes here on the lateral side of your face, it will now be called as the parotid fascia. And when it is now coming here to the parotid fascia, the parotid gland comes and now it splits, it encloses the parotid gland, just like your rectus sheath encloses, it reaches the lateral border of the rectus abdominis, splits to form the two laminae, encloses the entire rectus abdominis. When the medial border comes, then again it fuses, same is here. When it comes here, splits, encloses the entire parotid gland, and when the superior border of your, inferior border of your zygomatic arch comes, when again it fuses, and then it gets fused with the inferior border of your zygomatic arch. That means before reaching the zygomatic arch, it has already engulfed the parotid gland, whose inferior, whose deeper layer is thinner, but the superficial layer is very, very tough. You call it now deep cervical fascia's onward extension, this time you call it parotid fascia. But this parotid fascia will not stop here, it will continue now. And when continue, it will be over the zygomatic arch, and you see under the zygomatic arch there was a gap. So means if the over the zygomatic arch it is passing here, it will come here over the temporal zone. You see over the bones over the temple, means 4 bones which you already forming the pterion. So it will passing over the pterion, but it is not touching them. So not touching means if you are passing your hand deeper to the zygomatic arch, your fingers will go inside, just like your fingers, obviously not your fingers, there is present temporalis muscle. So when your fingers will be underneath them, and if you are lifting, who will be lifted? Deep cervical fascia. Deep fascia will be lifted. This time parotid fascia. This time you don't call it parotid fascia because it is passing here over the lateral side. Over the lateral side you will see here 2 lines. These are called the temporal lines. This line which starts here from the posterior border of the zygomatic bone here, and then comes here like a ridge till it becomes now continuous with the zygomatic to the mastoid process. This line is called the superior temporal line. The fascia which I was telling you, in fact is passing after a fusion with your inferior border of the zygomatic arch, then it comes here, covers the entire bones here till it fuses again second time with the superior temporal line here. So right from the inferior fusion with the zygomatic arch till the superior fusion with the superior temporal line, this whole fascia segment will be called as the temporal fascia. Same it was deep cervical fascia's onward extensions. Previously called deep cervical because it is not cervical, it is not a neck, it is the parotid fascia, so it is called the parotid gland, so it is called the parotid fascia. This time is the temple, you call them temporal fascia up to the superior temporal line. Below that we have got another smaller, you say thinner ridge, that is called the inferior temporal line. Below the inferior temporal line means from inferior temporal line onward there is the origin of temporalis muscle. But in the superior temporal line there is attachment of your temporalis, I say temporal fascia. So that means here on the lateral side your deep fascia is waiting now, because on this side as well as on the other side it is attached here to the superior temporal line. Behind already it is waiting. Why waiting? Because we have told you that this whole circle is starting from the chin, lower part of body of mandible, angle of mandible, mastoid process, superior knuckle line, external occipital protuberance. All your fascia is stopped here. Means now this fascia from side is stopped where? Up to the temporal superior temporal line, and behind up to the superior knuckle lines. Means from here this fascia will be actually asked to stay for a while. Will this fascia have the superior borders, are these borders free? No, they are actually the remaining part of your head will be covered by this fascia. From superior temporal line it will come up to the top, up to the vertex. From superior temporal line it will come up to the vertex, and from superior knuckle line it will come also. So it will like a cap, it will be like here, but not over the forehead. This will be again a fascia, but this time fascia because it is covering over the cranium, that's why this is called the aponeurosis. You call this aponeurosis as the epicranial aponeurosis. Why we call it aponeurosis? Because up to the hairline it was present, then behind it was present up to this line, I say superior temporal lines, and behind up to the knuckle lines, superior knuckle lines, and anteriorly. Why? Because on the forehead there is a muscle, so this aponeurosis will actually be attached with the frontal bellies of this muscle whose name is the occipitofrontalis muscle, and behind it is attached here to the occipitalis bellies of the frontoccipitalis muscle or the occipitofrontalis muscle. In between there is an aponeurosis, and this aponeurosis will be actually forming incidentally the third layer of the scalp also after skin and connective tissue. This is aponeurosis. SCA, A is aponeurosis. This is called the epicranial aponeurosis. S is the skin, and then you see C is the connective tissue. You call it the dense connective tissue, and third is the say L is called the loose areolar tissue, and last will be the bone's outer surface, that is called the periosteum. This is the P. We will discuss the scalp later, but you see here this is the lateral view in which you are actually watching these areas. So you are looking from the lateral side all these areas related to the lateral view of the skull. So by now you have seen the outer features of your skull from the front, from the lateral side, this time from superior and from the posterior side. As far the base of the skull is concerned, or the inferior view of the skull, inferior view of the skull means 3 things you have to do. Anterior 1/3, you can say hard palate, middle 1/3 2 fossa. If you see laterally 2 fossa, they are laterally means 1 fossa, this is very big, that is called infratemporal fossa, and very much connected to the infratemporal fossa, the pterygopalatine fossa. And in the most posterior 1/3, it is actually the muscles which are lying at the base of the skull. These are the muscles which are around the vertebral column, because you know that in the posterior 1/3 of the base of the skull there is the foramen magnum, and under the foramen magnum is the vertebral column, and around the vertebral column we have got the muscles, we call them perivertebral muscles. So that means the posterior 1/3 of the base of the skull basically is related to the vertebral muscles. Middle 1/3 is related to the two fossa, that is called the infratemporal and the pterygopalatine fossa, and the anterior 1/3 is related here to the roof of the oral cavity, that is called the hard palate. Hard palate will be done in the oral cavity. Infratemporal and pterygopalatine fossa we have already discussed, and perivertebral muscles we have already have an idea about in the muscles of the neck we have discussed that also. This was your class, and in which we have discussed here the outer important landmarks from various views of the skull. Various views of the skull. The anterior is called norma frontalis, behind is called the norma occipitalis, from above is called the norma verticalis. Means if you actually put the horizontal plane on the top of your head, the point that touches you first, the highest point of the skull, it is called the vertex. This is called the vertical view. Vertical view is called norma verticalis. On the sides you are seeing it is a norma lateralis here. This was the class today.